I may just like fall in love with the New York Jets yet again.
Welcome to the most anticipated podcast that's coming out today. Just kidding. Little Taylor Swift hopping on Travis Kelce's show, announcing an album. I mean, that's a lot to compete with, Sam Bruchhaus. Something tells me our audience might be a little bit different.
Look, it was very funny. People were talking about Taylor Swift. There was a lot of anticipation. And I'm like, who wrote 3,000 words about Taylor Swift last year? Samuel D. Bruchhaus. I am a deep diver into the Taylor Swift discography, in particular how it relates to the National Football League. So I'm pretty excited to go, learn a little bit about T-Swiss. And we got Travis Kelce back with the buzz cut and fade, which is a big update. I think this really changes the Chiefs' outlook this season.
He just looks better. And so therefore...
Yeah, he got right, as they say. He got in the barber chair and he got right preseason, and who knows if she was a part of that. But I'm excited to go watch.
I'm looking at some fantasy ADPs right here, and he is going with the second to last pick on average of the 7th round.
Bump him up to the 6th now that he has a nice fade. That's what I saw.
It does feel very interesting though, because if he's going to be a big part of the offense. And if he plays better than he did last year, that could be a big value guy, or a guy who's kind of flying under the radar at this time. So one of the things that we're going to talk about today on the SumerSports show is week 1 of the preseason. And we're all kind of looking for this. These are our first little clues, our little bits of evidence of what things are going to look like. This was the first time that we got a chance to see all of the teams on the field, not all of the players, notably. A lot of starters were sat, certainly, but there are still things that we can take away, especially our X's and O's guru, Shawn Syed, who's going to join us in a little bit, who has his eye on 3 very specific things that he'll run through for us. We're going to talk to Mike Renner, who is CBS Sports NFL draft analyst and obviously knows a lot about the rookie class, having studied them for the draft, and now has a week of preseason games plus all of the training camp data. I guess it's technically not data, it's buzz. To kind of come to some conclusions about who's going to be important immediately and who maybe is not going to be as important immediately as we had previously thought. Aside from those concepts, was there anything that stood out to you from the last week in the NFL? A few injuries. You can't avoid it at this time of the year, which is why they sit a lot of these starters. There was one injury in particular that happened at practice that I think is going to have a massive effect on this season.
Right. I think the outlook for the Chargers this year, as it was kind of last year in the first year of Jim Harbaugh, was that they have 2 of the best tackles in football. And that, unfortunately, is no longer the case. Rashawn Slater goes down with a pretty severe knee injury, I believe, or leg injury. And pretty immediately, the Chargers announced that he will be out for the season after undergoing corrective surgery. That's a big deal. And I think when you really lean into some of these tackle injuries, you also think of Tristan Wirfs, who should miss some weeks of the season, particularly for these teams that, are probably around a 10-win projection, are probably going to be one of the better teams in the league, but not necessarily a clear division winner. That means a lot. I am a big proponent in this 2-tackle theory that if you have 2 tackles that are excellent, you automatically have a good offense as long as the quarterback can keep the trains running. And it really changes the outlook for a team that is known for struggling with, wide receivers, does have an excellent quarterback, a top tier quarterback in my belief, but has some questions at running back with Najee Harris missing time and a rookie in Amarian Hampton being in the backfield. So I think there's so many questions in the skill position room, but I think their loss of the 2-tackle theory here is going to be a real big difference.
100%. So big. I remember around the end of the year last year when we were having conversations about all pro and that kind of stuff. Or actually it was Pro Bowl because Joe Alt was leading in the Pro Bowl votes at tackle. And my argument at the time was he's not the best tackle on his team, right? How many teams can you even have that conversation about, whether you agree with the statement or not? They're both so good. So a strength turns into I wouldn't say a weakness, but not a strength for
Exactly. And I think to like literally put a number on it, there's probably 5 teams total, including the Chargers, that you can say that 2 of their tackles are good. You list them off. It's the Eagles, the Vikings, the Bucks, the Lions, and the Bills. Those are 5 of the top 10 teams in the league. And so it's just such a different class of team when you have those 2, particularly for a team that struggled a little bit in the running game last year, particularly after injuries. It's going to change the calculus of that team. I personally believe that it's not going to be as negative as it was when the Vikings lost Christian Darrisaw last year. And we kind of saw Sam Darnold, the wheels start to fall off. Ultimately, now
minus
in
the
a
kind of
Seahawks uniform. Yeah. I don't think that's going to be the case with Justin Herbert. I think Justin Herbert is miles and miles and miles more talented than Sam Darnold, at least out as it stands right now. But for an injury, prone quarterback as well, who's known to miss a game or 2 during the year, it also makes a big difference.
There are a few other injuries that I think are worth just talking about briefly. We got an update on Darnell Mooney out of Atlanta that is not necessarily, I wouldn't attach the word optimistic to it. We're hearing, the phrases week to week being attached to him. We'll have him back healthy this year.
Not ideal.
Not great. What does that do to the Falcons if they don't have him?
So I think the way that you pick up on these injuries preseason is how they affect the element of the team. We talked about the 2 tackle theory a little bit. There's also a real research behind the idea that you need a quality third receiver to be a quality offense. And I think that the real ascendance for the Falcons last year, and the reason that they were able to keep their head above water when Kirk Cousins wasn't playing super well, and then why Michael Penix looked really good, was that they had 3 or 4 really premium receiving options, if you could include Bijan Robinson. That's obviously Kyle Pitts as the third receiver, Drake London as the superstar number 1, and then Darnell Mooney quietly was like getting into the top 30 wide receivers by way of target share and yards per route run, despite being looked at as a career, wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 while he was with the Bears. So he quietly crept into a certified wide receiver 2 in this league, and probably one of the best Z's in the league when you really look at it. And if they don't have him, the cupboards are bare. We're talking about Ray McLeod, Cardero Hodge, guys who have not contributed at that level ever in their career. And that makes a massive difference when you have what is realistically a rookie quarterback coming in to a situation where they're expected to be a team that challenges for the NFC South. And I think when you lose that third wide receiver, it makes things a heck of a lot easier to defend Drake London. There's already the questions about Kyle Pitts, and Bijan Robinson is looked at as one of the best fantasy players. When you can really only focus on 2 of those guys now, it makes a big, big difference.
Yeah, he had a target share of 21%. It's pretty high, I think, to attach to his specific name. I don't think that you would have necessarily thought that would be that as high.
I think when he was signed by the Falcons, a lot of people were like, that was interesting. That seems a little bit high. And then as the season went on, it became one of the best value contracts in the league when you're considering what a guy like Devontae Smith is being paid, a guy like T. Higgins are being paid, who are obviously slightly above him in terms of these metrics, but are in the same class of a certified second receiver. It became an excellent value contract. I really would love to see him healthy so that we can have a full strength Falcons offense for Michael Penix.
He had a higher yards per route run than Calvin Ridley, which isn't to say it was like a mind-blowingly high yards per route run. It was 2, but still, yeah. So he played well, and that could be a big loss. And by the way, I love that you included Kyle Pitts in the order in which you did, because I'm not sure he belongs there. Still waiting for Kyle Pitts to prove that he's good. So another guy, speaking of, I mentioned Calvin Ridley, speaking of the Titans, Tajay Spears got hurt. I thought that he was interesting this weekend in a few ways. One, it was Pollard with the starters, and then Tajay Spears came in, and then he got hurt with a high ankle sprain. So first it was a clear 1 and 2 situation. And then the 2, who we were wondering like what kind of role he might have, got hurt. And so high ankle sprain, I mean, that feels like a big loss. This might be more of like a fantasy football note in terms of identifying a backfield where it looks like it's pretty much going to go through one guy, whereas we previously thought it might be multiple backs or something like that. So Tony Pollard maybe gets a little bit of a boost there. I don't want to frame it like that. Like, guy got hurt, and so good news for him.
It's interesting because I think a lot of people, particularly folks who like drafting wide receivers in fantasy drafts early, try to hunt out true value at the running back position. And I think that Tajay Spears was someone who I had circled and who, when we plugged a lot of data into some pretty sophisticated models, was above the ADP where we thought he was versus where his ADP was, because he is targeted a lot in that offense and they utilize him quite a bit in the passing game as well. And the thesis obviously would be that Tony Pollard is growing a year older. Perhaps, he loses a step. He had a pretty good year last year. Obviously, injuries are always a question for running backs, and that Tajay Spears could really step in his third year and be a contributor both in the passing and the running game. And I think we've seen the kernels of that in previous years. And I think this year really could have been the fruition in which, if you were, diving deep for value in late rounds, you could have picked up Tajay Spears and all of a sudden he has 4 or 5 pretty solid fantasy weeks. I really want to see how he recovers from this injury, particularly at the running back position, because it can change the face of a Titans offense, which, frankly, you look at their depth chart, you look at their offensive line, a lot of investment has gone into it. You look at Moore, you look at Latham, you look at some of the interior linemen, Zietler, who they picked up, who I had as an all-pro last year. There's a lot of investment going into that. When you pair it with a rookie quarterback, it could have some upside for the offense as compared to, the 32nd ranked offense, which they basically were last year.
Sort of, well, not similar or similar, but in different ways. Rashad White hurt his groin. So
that's very interesting to me in particular, given our discussions about Bucky Irving. I know you did, and ask me anything that folks can go find on Reddit right now. Lindsay, excellent answers. We talk all the time and we text, and it's very interesting. We get so deep that it's often interesting to see other people ask you questions, not just me, because it's interesting to see your thought patterns. And we have been the Bucky Irving fan club over here. I personally think the best spot to draft this year is the 7th spot, because you can double dip in value by picking up perhaps a wide receiver who has some injury concerns like AJ Brown or Puka Nacua, who probably has, literal number 1 wide receiver ranked upside. And then you can go back in the 2nd round and pick up a Bucky Irving, who I think could potentially be the best running back. The Rashad White news does make a big difference there.
I was at the Fantasy Football Expo over the weekend in Canton, Ohio. Great weekend if you are a hardcore fantasy football fan. Everyone is so welcoming and nice and just wanting to invite everybody that they run into conversations. And so it was a really fun thing to be at. One of the questions, though, that I ended up asking just about everybody that I was in conversation with from an analyst standpoint was, who's one guy that you don't like at ADP? Like, who's the guy that you're not drafting? And I was shocked. 2 people said to me Bucky Irving. And after I fought them physically, just kidding, I was like, but I thought that was really, really interesting. And by the way, separate interesting thought, so many people identified people in the first 2 rounds with that answer, which I also thought was interesting, because sometimes it's like somebody who's going in the middle rounds that you're just like, I am off him. And there's a reason he's in the middle rounds, but like, I'm still not rolling the dice there because I'm off completely. It was first 2 rounds focused. And then there were different people that, we all just kind of valued differently. But I was a little bit surprised that Bucky was one of the names that came up.
Well, playing devil's advocate to ourselves here, Lindsay, we did talk, we spoke all of July and about how much we love Bucky Irving. And in June, we spoke all about how you can't trust running backs. And so I could foresee why, in the context of only the running back position, and I talked to a little bit about this on an article, which you can find about kind of some of these insights that we found over the summer on SumerSports.com right now. But you can't really trust running backs. But in this particular season, where you have 10 to 15 wide receivers who could potentially be league winners, even all the way down to Ladd McConkey if he sees his target share really boost up to match his yards per route run. It just doesn't make positional sense. And this is kind of how the actual draft works as well, to go ahead and spend all of your draft capital, whether that's auction or, snake draft, on wide receivers in the first or second round when you have such upside that you can chase at the running back position. And I think Bucky Irving is a perfect example of someone that you could potentially get in the second round. So you could grab one of those top tier wide receivers if that's the direction you want to go, and still have a hero RB in theory that you can kind of hitch your wagons to.
100%. We're getting into a deep in the weeds fantasy conversation now, but I think that just depends on where you are in the round and whether or not you think that Bucky will get back to you, because he's absolutely going to go unless, I mean, you might be in a league where somebody values him. Like, we can't predict that. But in terms of ADP, he is consistently going in the second round, sometimes towards the end of the second round. And I like him. I've come to the conclusion that I like him more than consensus, and it's all a relative consensus, but I like him more. So I'm going to end up with a lot of Bucky Irving on my teams. I want to push back a little bit on your statement. And I know that's not what you meant. You said, like, you can't trust running backs. And I think you can trust running backs when certain boxes are checked, right? As much as you can trust anybody. Like, there's always a wide receiver, an injury risk. There's always certain things that could happen that you just have to bake into it. But from a running back standpoint, I think one of the things I don't totally understand about Bucky Irving and the assessment about him this offseason is I think the Bucs are going to be good on offense. And I don't totally, I mean, I know that there have been some changes from a coaching staff standpoint, but like the wide receivers are back. They've added even more. I mean, you and I have kind of touched on maybe Tristan Wirfs being a little bit banged up, not 100%. Maybe he's not as strong as he has been in past years. And maybe that's something to look out for if the O-line isn't as good as it was. But like, I mean, when you're comparing different offenses around the league, I'm like, that one. Like, that one I liked. Right. They certainly didn't seem to get worse in the offseason. No. And so I'm not expecting as much regression as I think some people are. And by the way, if there is a regression for like a Baker, which I think mathematically you think that maybe there's a chance that there is, then doesn't that point us to Bucky?
Yeah. So, I mean, to kind of put a bow on this entire discussion, we talked about the two tackle theory. The Bucs are probably the second or third most powerful team in that, with Luke Edeke and Tristan Wirfs when healthy. And then if you want to talk about the third receiver theory, they got like the fourth or fifth receiver theory. They got the pass catchers are loaded on that team. They probably have the best pass catching unit when healthy in the league, outside of maybe the Vikings. Like, there may be one of two teams that truly satisfy both of these theories. Obviously, the Vikings hasn't always shown up in their EPA per play, but it shows up in the win column time after time, and they're able to push through. And a lot of that can be attributed to the quarterback probably as well. So the Buccaneers, if there's an offensive ecosystem that, number one, either can get up on teams, or number two, can rely on their run game, it's probably seemingly the Buccaneers out of probably anyone in the entire league.
We're going to talk to Mike Renner in just a little bit from CBS. He's going to talk to us about the rookies that he likes more, the same, and less than he did maybe a month ago, based on the things that we learned in the preseason. And also, you know who else has some thoughts on the preseason week one and has been tweeting them out, just like fueling the masses that are hungry for football? It's Shawn Syed, back with us again. Shawn, you noted something about a special teams play in preseason week one that has blown up. And that is not something that is typically the case, that a special teams takeaway would be particularly notable. But there have been some changes on special teams this year, and one team in particular seemed to kind of shift their strategy as a result. Tell me about what jumped out about the Panthers.
Lindsay, look, special teams matter. So Sam played special teams. He's going to be the first one to tell you how much it matters. I really liked looking at what the Carolina Panthers were doing on their kickoffs. And now with the new kickoff in its second year, the touchbacks are going to be up to the 35-yard line. That should give teams a little bit more reason to kick that ball in bounds. And the way the Panthers handled it is, you're kicking kind of a line drive kick. You're hopefully getting it to bounce inside the 20-yard line. Football is a really weird shape. It's hard to field. And once that ball hits the ground, now your kick coverage unit can go ahead and run down the field. They did it 3 times. There were 2 instances where the Panthers were able to stop the returner at the 22-yard line. That's more than a first down yardage of distance away from what you would get if you were to just kick the ball through the back of the end zone. I love that they did it. We saw it from some other teams. There was the Texans. I think it was the Cardinals as well. Just try it, right? Like, we have a new rule. Don't just surrender. Don't give up. Don't give up on a whole entire play. That kickoff, I was really excited to see the Panthers do it. I'm sure return teams will try and adjust, but it made me really happy watching, week 1, all 22 from the preseason.
So Shawn, that's what I want to hone in on is like the reason we moved to this kickoff in the first place was to increase explosive plays and increase returns. And so if we are getting in a situation where the returners are only getting 10 yards, that's not good for the league. But we have a lot of really smart special teams coordinators. So in your view, you have probably looked at this going back to the XFL more than anyone. What do you think the retort from special teams coordinators will be in the return game?
You're right. I spent a little bit too much time on this overall. I think that as a special teams unit now, you're adding value if you can really kind of feel out the placement of where a kicker is going to kick the ball to. So you're moving your returners a little bit. You don't just have their heels on maybe like that 3-4 yard line. Maybe you have like kind of like an I formation where it looks like a fullback and a halfback. You have like a kind of up returner and a back returner, so you can kind of feel it out. I remember last preseason, I think it was like the Packers that tried something like that, and I think it discourages it just a little bit. I also think like returners are going to get better at fielding the ball because they have to. I think that kickers, I believe in the kickers, guys. I really, really believe in the kickers. I want to see them do these crazy things because even if you kick the ball out of bounds, I think the ball just goes out to the 40, like awful spot to have. It's only 5 yards further out than a touchback, right? So if you're constantly pinning them near that 20-yard line, I feel like if you have a really good kicker, I'm pushing the advantage towards the kickoff team here.
Is it interesting? I mean, on the one hand, this is the time, like you said, that you want to try things out. On the other hand, strategically, you could almost hold this and wait for the regular season and bust this out in a game that matters.
I totally get that. I just think it's going to work in the regular season as well. Because I'm trying to think of, well, like Sam asked, what are the kind of rebuttals to this? It's like, all right, are you going to move your returner up? Well, now we can just kick it away from that returner. Are you going to have 2 guys that are back there that are going to be able to field it? I totally understand, like, hey, we have to be aware of it. I also think there's a lot of value in there's just like a crystal clear proof of concept. If you're an NFL team, if you're a special teams unit, you can't say that, hey, I have no example of this working. I tried to advocate for that like line drive kind of knuckleball kick last year too. And there were teams that tried it. The Cowboys were able to get a few really nice examples. You get some cool examples in the wind, but everyone's seen it. Like every single person has seen a really good example of doing this. So I think there's like no excuse to at least try and see what your kicker has in store.
What does it say that it's the Panthers that are the ones that did this?
I would say the person that hired me at SumerSports, Eric Eager, was certainly maybe he read the XFL research. I think that there's some reports in Carolina. I think
Are you taking credit for this? Is that what's actually happening right now?
No. I'm giving Eric the credit for it. There were some reports from Carolina. I think it was a reporter. I think his name was Mike Kay. He asked the Panthers special teams coach, and the special teams coach kind of pointed to Eric Eager and his kind of help on that. So, maybe this kickoff doesn't work. Maybe it does work a ton, but trying to find an edge. Just try, right? You have a new rule. Try your best to try and make something of it.
I feel like, so there are lots of things to take away from here. Like big picture, I kind of love, if I'm a Panthers fan, that we're pointing to them and saying, look at who's being creative. Look at who's trying new things. Look who is listening to the analytics department and then rolling it out. And they're all kind of working in concert with each other. And I feel like this is it, whether it works or not, kind of signaled that maybe we're moving in the right direction, which I know a lot of us are kind of feeling a little bit optimistic about the Panthers and that they take some strides forward this year. But yet another example here. What about on the offensive side of the ball? Did anything in particular, or any teams jump out at you?
One that actually stood out to me was the Jets. And we're thinking about it where Aaron Glenn is coming from Detroit and hopefully bringing a lot of that Lions mentality to New York. And the offensive coordinator there is going to be Tanner Engstrand, who some people thought maybe he was going to be the one to take over for Ben Johnson in Detroit. I really liked some of the details that they had in the run game. I think, you're obviously not seeing ones-on-ones, but I think there's a chance that the Jets offensive line could just be a good unit, where now the offensive line coach in New York was the former tight ends coach in Detroit. So you're hopefully having just a good meeting of the minds there. I was excited by the way that, I made a little video about this, just using receivers kind of as blockers on defensive ends in different ways, which is not a matchup that you want usually but finding just like a creative way to change up what offenses usually do. I'm just kind of excited. I think that week 1 of the preseason, are you learning a ton? Maybe not, but you see like the absolute kind of bones, like the structure of an offense, and to kind of feel that already in week 1 of the preseason for the Jets, I think that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I mean, and even like boiling down into like really small details, there are things that you can kind of learn about maybe somebody's usage. Like Wandale Robinson wasn't necessarily operating out of the slot. I think his ADOT in this game was like 12. Like that's literally night and day from last year and how they used him. So there are things here and there that we can take away. I know, Sam, you noticed that in that game, Fields was under center a little bit more than we're used to seeing him.
Yeah, me and Shawn have long discussed wanting to see a quarterback design run heavy offense, which, Shawn doesn't like all that much, and I call for like a maniac every single year. And I think
what's the argument here, like between the two of you? How do you come down on this one differently?
Sam is the furthest extremist of the quarterback design run game committee, which like in college football, I'm absolutely on Sam's side on that. But I mean, Sam's asking for Baker Mayfield to run quarterback power like 10 times a game. And I have just maybe a little bit more concern. Now, of course, I would like a quarterback to be involved in the run game at some level. I don't want them to have 15 carries a game. The Jets are a fun example, Sam. I think we're probably a little bit closer here where absolutely. I mean, Justin Fields was a special runner. Get him involved. Now we're getting sets where it's him, Allen, and Hall in the backfield. I think that would be so much fun to have.
100%. And I think that's what intrigued me, because obviously it's the preseason. Obviously Justin Fields has already had a slight injury this preseason, but we were even seeing, video of Brady Cook running in the zone read. And I don't think Brady Cook has probably ever run the zone read ever in his life. And he definitely did not do so a ton at Missouri. So all that being said, I expected a lot of shotgun. I expected a lot of motion, which we got. But what I was very interested in was that Justin Fields was under center a lot. And obviously, considering Tanner Inkstead has worked with Jared Goff, who is a very efficient quarterback when he is under center, makes sense that that's what they want to do. They want to get downhill, and especially given all the motion and the wide receivers blocking and the kind of readjustment of the field pre-snap that Shawn alluded to, it's a little easier when the quarterback's, hiding a little bit behind those big guys up front. So I'm really interested to see what the blend will be and whether we can actually get some design runs out of the under center sets, Shawn, which I think if I get that week 1, I may just like fall in love with the New York Jets yet again. And I'm a little hesitant to do that, but I am excited about all the things that you've highlighted. I'm excited about what this team, which, doesn't necessarily have a top tier quarterback, doesn't necessarily have a lot of top tier skill talent, at least as it compares to this year, not super deep there. I'm really interested to see how they use all these weapons, particularly given, as Lindsay noted, there's a lot of people in that backfield. Braylon Allen got some juice. Isaiah Davis. Interesting. Donovan Edwards was the leading carrier for the Jets. So I think there's so many ways that this Jets offense can go.
You named every running back except for the one.
Well, yeah, but we know Brees is there. Okay. So I'm a little bit more interested in how many people are going to get going. And I'm interested in your thoughts, Shawn. Like, we've seen the Lions trot out 2 running backs that are featured. We saw Jamal Williams, we saw DeAndre Swift, then we saw Jameer, and we saw David Montgomery. What are the chances that we see 2 or 3 guys involved based on just kind of what your feeling was from the preseason?
I mean, I have to imagine, and not like a full split, or just like there's going to be more than one ball carrier in New York. And Fields should cut into that, just a little bit. I know from a fantasy football perspective, that might just be tough to have to kind of consider and kind of just like peek your way through overall. But if I'm a Jets fan, I would like to have like maybe not a hot hand mentality, but maybe it's matchup specific where you find out over time, hey, this running back is a little bit better out of the backfield, or, this running back is better on this specific concept. If you're a Jets offense, you want to find out, like, put your best guys in the best situations. I think the same way that the Lions are really able to take advantage of Jahmyr Gibbs just being an absolute lightning bolt out of the backfield. I don't think you should minimize your talent. I don't think the Jets' goal is to just like, hey, we need to find like a lead bell cow back and make, I think, fantasy owners happy. But their job is to put their players in the best position to win. And it might be just a circumstance where it's some specific concept, some specific matchups kind of lean towards more of one running back than the other.
All of these Lions comps, I have to say the obvious thing here, and that is that Justin Fields and Jared Goff could not be more different in terms of what their strengths and weaknesses are. So how closely can they resemble the Lions?
That's a great question, because the biggest thing is, like, if you look at how often Jared Goff throws over the middle of the field, he is just throwing missiles over the middle with full trust. And that's something that Fields hasn't done as much of. So I think that's where it falls on Engstrom to find these different ways, where there was one example that I talked about in the video where it's like a receiver's blocking a defensive end and you're just kind of pinning that guy so your quarterback can kind of get out on a play action fake. He can gain the edge. So you're finding different ways where, I do enjoy Jared Goff as a quarterback. I don't think you're going to like roll him out all the time. So I think you're going to look at what are the strengths of Fields, where maybe you say, hey, he is not going to throw the ball always to the same areas that Jared Goff did, but Fields has tools that you can take advantage of that Goff didn't have. So I'm excited, for Tanner Engstrom to have, his full control, really, really kind of put his thumbprint on that offense overall.
I think that everyone who follows you and is familiar with you at all understands your love affair with Vic Fangio and his schemes. Are we like developing a different relationship, like hard eyes over here with Mike Macdonald in Seattle?
Lindsay, I love good football. I will say Vic Fangio, like he's like personally important to my professional career. I do think though the defense that I really liked watching from preseason week 1, I mean, the interception, that one of the many interceptions that they had against the Raiders, where you're sending 4 guys, you're overloading one side, you're creating a free rusher, you're putting a trap coverage behind it. It's so much to handle. And the fact that we're doing that in week 1 of the preseason, that's like how I opened up the video. I was like, this is what we're doing in week 1 of the preseason. This is now another year of Mike Macdonald having that system in place in Seattle, where when you look back at the Baltimore days, people don't think too much back to it was a game against the Dolphins where like Kyle Hamilton's kind of going one way, another safety is going the other way. The ball is in the end zone by the time that anyone realizes it. So for Macdonald to have a second year, that's what we're doing on day 1 install. I think he feels really confident in his teaching process. They have such a fun, versatile secondary. They have a rail front. I'm excited to see kind of just what Macdonald does overall with the linebackers, because Roquan Smith, that season he had with Macdonald was so special, where you're just vacuuming up space in the middle of the field. So yeah, I mean, I can be open about it. Like, I love watching this defense. Who wouldn't? There's a chance that this defense is the best defense in the league. I'm excited to see some of the changes for the Seahawks on the offensive side of the ball. But from like a schematic perspective, I think at a certain level from a player perspective, I mean, I have no desire to want to go up against the Seattle Seahawks defense.
Best defense in the league,
Potentially. I mean, maybe. Lindsay, we just got to week 1 of the preseason, right?
You said the sentence, not me. Don't yell at me.
I think when you look at the front, when you look at who's on the back end, I'm excited. It's not just, I love Nicky Manwari and you can kind of put him in all these places. I mean, just think of the versatility. Like, Reek Wallen is an awesome cornerback. Witherspoon is really versatile. You have a rail, just mean, nasty defensive front between Leonard Williams, between Byron Murphy, between Jerron Reed, even if you're able to get a healthy DeMarcus Lawrence, I think that gives McDonald so much like flexibility to almost be less complicated, where he can say, I just have all these guys up front that can take care of the run, and like let's just go ahead and play it regular. I think that's going to be something really fun. Now, I will say, after saying, hey, this could maybe be the top defense in the league, a little bit I think could happen where, maybe your offense isn't all the way at that top end. Your defense is in a little bit tougher situations. You're obviously in that NFC West. I need the regular season games, Lindsay. I need them because I really do believe in what McDonald's putting together.
I want to dig deeper because you mentioned the complication of the defense. And I think the reason why people could be shocked that this could be the best defense in the league is because some of the names that you mentioned, like, we know, but like aren't massive star names on the Myles Garrett level or something like that. Obviously, Leonard Williams is excellent and an all-pro level performer. But what is really innovative about this defense is the way that he teaches the defense and the reasons why he can put people in the places that they are. Can you kind of describe a little bit more about how he teaches the defense and why, in particular, the instance in your video is so easy to do for a Mike Macdonald defense while being so difficult to deal with for an offense?
What I love about McDonald is, I mean, there's situations from his past where it's like you're just throwing a new player in that situation and this guy can play full speed, because I think McDonald knows how to streamline the teaching for that specific player and really for the defense overall, where some things can be like X's on a chalkboard instead of positions, where it's like, this is the pressure path that we're going to have. That example against the Raiders, it's like, hey, I'm going to force half of your offensive line to slide one way. overload you on the other side. That can be like any position. The Chargers ran a similar pressure against the Saints, and it's like now this is a different type of body. So I really like McDonald's ability to say, this is my pressure of the week. I'm going to dress it up 6 different ways. I know that you can't block it. Like it's such a beautiful way to do it. It's the same reason why I think we spent so much time in our like careers just praising Sean McVay, where it's like, hey, I'm just going to run this kind of concept. Like it's all going to sort of look different, but it's really just the same thing. McDonald does that for a little bit, but I think he is special because it is not an easy job to study these offensive lines and be like, oh, the right tackle's right ankle, when it's at this degree, that's when I know it's a pass. And because of that, now I can get to this pressure. That is not easy to do. And I think for him to be able to do it over and over, you're hoping that those front 4 guys, maybe that says like McDonald says, hey, just go play, just go get after the ball. I don't have to scheme up the fanciest thing this week. But I really like, when you look at like a coach's install, for example, I think you can see just some of the details. Obviously, a lot of it is taught, in meetings or verbally. Some people are going to learn more kind of on the field as well, but just like looking through some of his materials, just seeing, okay, this is what he's trying to achieve. He's trying to show his players, well, this is kind of our high level goal. This is the more narrow goal. This is how we're going to put you in this specific situation. I think he has absolutely earned players' trust, and I think players play fast for him on the field.
Sam, I think our boy is like lit from the inside right now. Like no one is happier than Shawn Syed that football is back, that there are X's and O's for him to break down, which he is doing with a almost disturbing amount of frequency, considering it's just 1 week into the preseason. You should go follow him on the Twitter at Syed Schemes. It's our boy Shawn Syed. Thank you so much.
Thanks as always, guys.
All right, for a different perspective on what we've seen in the preseason so far, let's talk rookies specifically and bring in Mike Renner, lead draft analyst for CBS Sports. Hi, Mike.
Hey, how's it going, guys?
It's going great. I mean, could it not be going great? Like, it's preseason football. And I know that probably comes across like I'm saying that sarcastically, but I am not. This is a great time of year. This is what we love, right? After talking about all of these guys in the draft and now kind of getting like little breadcrumbs 1 week at a time, leading us to like what will actually matter and who's actually going to be good and who's not and all that kind of fun stuff.
Yeah, I would actually describe more as like puzzle pieces, because they're not like this. You get like 10 snaps of a guy and you have to kind of figure out like, where do I put this information? Because was the guy he was going up against, did he stink? Was he playing against first stringers? Was it third stringers? So it's kind of like puzzle pieces that watching the tape, you got to figure out a lot of stuff before you can contextualize what we actually just saw.
There's lots to contextualize, and that's what you're here for. We thought we would break this down into 3 different categories. And the first one is players we thought were going to be good, and it looks like they will be out of the gate even, right? Like, so this is just to check the boxes, make sure we don't ignore people who are hugely important in order to talk about those like random guys at the bottom of the roster that we're excited about. But then we also want to talk about those guys that we weren't necessarily excited about before, but some things changed in the last few weeks and we think they might actually be people that need to be on our radar. And then the flip side, people we might have actually been excited about before, but like now we're kind of getting some snap counts with the first teamers and looking at where they are on the depth chart and going, maybe we were a little bit ahead of ourselves. So let's start with the big names and go for those guys that we kind of always thought were going to be good and it feels like we were onto something. Who is that guy for you, Mike?
There were 2 really big ones, but the first one is Tetairoa McMillan. And obviously, no surprise. He was first receiver off the board, I think number 8th overall pick. But just how much I think he can transform this Panthers offense is what I'm excited about. You only got, it was 8 pass plays with Bryce Young on that very first drive. 3 of them, though, he was targeted on. So already you saw Bryce Young looking his way, and it would have been a 4th, but Bryce Young felt pressure on a play. He was looking for him on deep out. Bryce Young felt pressure, had to check it down. So, like, he was looking his way wholesale. And on those 3 plays, it was, a go ball where at the snap, he just decided I'm going Tetairoa McMillan's way. It was a dig route where he threw it before he even broke. And it was that everyone saw the end zone play where he kind of has the shuffle. Bryce throws it before he's even out of his break. So he's trusting him to the degree that he didn't trust anyone last year, right? Like, he did not do that with Xavier Legette. He did not do that with Adam Thielen. This is unique. And this looks like Alabama Bryce Young for the first time. So those were plays that I'm like, okay, he has his guy. So T-Max 1, The other one's Matthew Golden to me. And it's kind of funny because for years, with this Packers receiving core and with Jordan Love, they kind of come up together. I've been banging the table. I'm like, they don't have a guy where third and medium, third and long, man coverage, they see one-on-one, that's where I'm going to. When they had Devontae Adams, that was it. You see that, you're going that way. Matthew Golden, his very first preseason game, 3rd and 7, slant route, he gets the ball. 3rd and 6, slant route, he gets the ball, converts both, one with the penalty, one by actually converting. But that's it. Like, that's the guy that they've been missing. Those routes, those plays is what they've been missing. So to finally have a guy that Jordan Love can trust in those situations, I think is going to pay massive dividends off for this offense. And it always was like a great fit schematically. So those two guys, maybe they're not going to break the rookie receiving record, but I think both are going to be number ones or number twos. Well, T-Mac's going to be number one, but Matthew Golden at worst and number two in that offense.
Let me ask a follow-up question about Matthew Golden. I was asked today, I did an AMA on Reddit for fantasy football, and somebody asked a question about kind of ranges for him. Like, if he hits his ceiling, like, what's the best case scenario? What's that kind of shot call? And from thinking about it from a fantasy football perspective, I'm still a little bit worried about the target distribution there and whether or not he's good enough to be like a full-fledged target earner, number one wide receiver, first read rate very high in that offense with the rest of those guys. So I'm curious to get your thoughts about how he fits in that regard and whether or not I might be off in that sense. But then secondarily, I am interested to hear your answer to that question about like where you would even tier him if he is the best version of himself that we're expecting this season in Green Bay. Where does he fit in terms of other receivers that are in his range?
Yeah, I don't foresee him being a wide receiver one in fantasy. Like, it's just, that's the offense, unfortunately, for any of the Packers wide receivers. And it's going to be a rotation, even from just a snap count perspective. I'd be surprised if he gets 90% of the pass plays this season. That's just not how they operate. And they have enough talent, like their wide receiver 5 is still a competent wide receiver. They don't just have a thin group where they have to play those top guys. And just how the offense operates, and even just like factoring also the tight ends, like Luke Musgrave and Tucker Kraft are going to get some targets in that offense. So I think best case scenario is something like 1,100 yards and 8 touchdowns. That's like everything goes well. He's the number one and hits the ground running. That's best case scenario. But I think more realistically, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of like 900 yards and 4 or 5 touchdowns, just because that's the nature of what they do offensively.
So I had said like best case scenario, maybe he ends up in, and again, I'm looking at this specific question through a fantasy lens, in like the same range as like a Zay Flowers, Calvin Ridley, Jamo Williams. But it sounds like that might even be like a little bit high compared to what you're seeing.
I don't think it's a little bit high. I just think like that is, again, best case. I just don't foresee him going above that. It would really be, they would really have to change to suit him what they have done in recent years for that to be the case.
Yeah, and it's interesting to me that you picked 2 wide receivers, because I also selected Tetairoa McMillan for this prompt because I was so locked in on target share. And I think that is one thing that is pretty sticky year to year. And moreover, if we start getting an idea via the preseason, via training camp, notebooks and such, that people are earning target share, I figure that's going to stick in the season. And so, like you said, Mike, Tetairoa McMillan getting those 5 targets across 2 quarterbacks that did play last year that they trust indicates that Dave Canales believes in him, number one. I think he has to clean up the drops a little bit as well. But I love that you selected Matthew Golden as well, because that team has never really had a high target share guy, even going back to the basically until since Devontae Adams was there. And so I'm really interested in how those tight ends are going to mix in, as you kind of mentioned. But to have the talent that you identified, Mike, I think is a separator from what Matt LaFleur has had to deal with in prior years. And I know, Lindsay, you've really locked in on that group and identified, who is struggling with drops, who is struggling with injury. And just another addition to that team may not raise his fantasy profile a ton, but it does raise the floor of the team.
I know you're also thrilled about the fact that he mentioned Tet McMillan, because Tetairoa, I'm going to train myself, you guys. Don't worry. It's only going to take a couple more weeks and then I will be on board. So
does he like T-Mac? Is T-Mac acceptable? Yes. I've been just going with T-Mac. T-Mac's easier for me.
T-Mac is good. It feels a little bit like you can't be T-Mac. There's already been a
Yeah.
you know, like you can't be the second T-Mac,
I
and
think enough
it
time
just feels
passed
weird.
where we can, T-Mac hasn't been relevant in what, 15, I mean, he's been on TV, but like we haven't talked about him in like 15 years. That makes me feel very old.
Legends never die, Mike.
But also that's kind of like when people called Aaron Rodgers A-Rod, and I was like, no, it's got to be Raj. Like you can't be A-Rod. Like we don't have two A-Rods. There's an A-Rod. A-Rod is A-Rod. Like you're allowed to be A-Raj. Period. End of story. So I have strong takes on these nicknames. There's one allowed per nickname.
But then, so we got to go with Tetaroa. Then you have to just say the full. It's just Tetaroa. There's no McMillan. There's just Tetaroa.
It's gonna sound very formal. But anyway, Sam, you like Tetaroa.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that he was the offensive skill player who could be a standout this year, and who had the opportunity to stand out, and who had the plan in place from top down, general manager down to head coaching staff, down to quarterback timeline to really stand out. And when I was just hunting through box scores before I watched the film, I wanted to know what the target number was. Despite the snaps, I wanted to know what, the snaps per target, per route run was, and it ended up being high. And I think that's going to be the MO, as Mike kind of alluded to with how he watched the film. And I saw a lot of similar things in that there's a trust there already. And I think when, the eye matches the AI there, when you're seeing a high target share, and when it's coming on first reads, it's coming on timing routes, it's coming on that nice long ball over the shoulder, a little bit of a contested catch, but it's clear Bryce and Tetaroa are on the same page. That's the things that I want to see. That's the things that I wanted to see in April. And I'm glad that we're seeing it this early. Hopefully it stays that way.
Yeah, mine is, it feels like it's kind of obvious, but also like, I think we've always been high on him. I've become more high on him in recent weeks, and that's Omarion Hampton. Like, I think we always knew that he was obviously going to have a role in the Chargers offense because of where they took him in the draft. But the fact that Najee was already there kind of made me feel a little bit like, I don't know exactly what the cap on his opportunity is this season. The fact that Najee is out and who knows when he'll be back. I think there's a very real possibility, even though I think actually Najee is a very good Jim Harbaugh style running back, and they'll probably find a role for him when he's available. But if he's not there at the outset, Omarion Hampton has a chance to win this role as a 3-down back, right? Like if he can do the things that we think he can do, and he has the opportunity to do them early on, like that job might never go away. So I feel like more and more the things that I'm hearing, and then, just buzz out of camp, people even like behind the scenes have said that like, oh, he's the real deal, and kind of like spreading that message off camera even, which always feels like it has a little bit more weight to it than if people go on TV or radio and say he looks good, like, because it feels very real. So Omarion Hampton is a guy that I think could be a running back we're talking about in like that upper tier by the end of the season. At least there might be an opportunity for that.
And I think, well, obviously the Slater injury doesn't help, but right. The big thing,
Mother of God, yeah,
is that there's not anything Najee Harris does that Omarion Hampton doesn't do. It's not like this is a complimentary situation where you could see, pass downs, Najee's in there, or, when they go spread, you want Najee in there. It's like, no, there's not really a scenario where you're like, okay, yeah, we want Najee. And it's just like everything Najee can do, Omarion can also do, but probably a little bit better. So I would agree with you there.
The thing that I'm a little worried about, especially off the back of the Slater injury, and we talked earlier in the show about, injuries and how they're going to affect it, particularly ones that we already kind of know the outcome with Slater. But the Chargers were like 18th in EPA per rush last year, not a below average team in that metric. And I'm worried, having lost a guy who was considered to be near an all-pro, was definitely a Pro Bowler, one of the better tackles in the league. Given what we saw to a certain degree last year with the Vikings when their tackles went down, if that will critically affect the rushing offense substantially more than the passing offense.
All right, what about guys who are moving in the other direction? Hit some big names or bigger names, people we thought would be on the field, and now we're like, oh shit.
I think the biggest one to me is RJ Harvey for the Broncos. I really thought, given the investment, given what was there in that running back room, because, they signed J.K. Dobbins after they drafted him. So early on, I'm like, There's no one impeding his path to the field. This was a rushing offense that was kind of a sleeping giant because I thought the running game or the offensive line was good in front of it. You obviously have Sean Payton, who knows how to scheme a running game. You had one of the worst backfields in the NFL last year. Devontae Williams just has not been it since he tore his ACL. So I thought there was just this great opportunity. And, we're out of Broncos camp no, it's actually J.K. Dobbins' role. J.K. Dobbins is the lead back. Then you watch him in his first game, and yeah, he looks athletic, but I thought from a run vision perspective, he was bouncing duo, at both times they ran duo, and one of them definitely was not a bounce read, in my opinion. His outside zone vision was just a little off, it did not look like he was fully comfortable running outside zone just yet. So I can see why maybe they're hesitant to put him as the lead dog there in that offense. Not say he won't play a big role, but I was thinking, he could be up there in terms of fantasy points with some of the other guys we mentioned, Marion Hampton, Ashton Genty. He could be right there in the mix given the situation around him, but I do not believe that anymore.
That's an offense in general that I feel like is kind of one big question mark for me. I think that they'll be good, but literally when you try to decide which ones and how much, if you look at them individual by individual, I feel a lot of not really sure. I'm not sure how this specific individual will fit in, which is a weird narrative to break it down that way when the sum of the parts I think probably will be good. It almost doesn't make sense to me that that's the conclusions that we come to, or I'm coming to.
Well, I think the interesting thing too, and we all very closely covered the draft, was the narrative going into day one of the draft was that they wanted to draft a running back in round one. And then Jahdae Barron ends up falling to them. And by all accounts, it seems that they were just this is too good value to pass up. And then thus they end up investing in RJ Harvey. So it just seemed like they wanted to add a feature back, kind of as you said, Mike, and maybe that's just not the case. Maybe they do like the value of JK coming later on in free agency. Maybe the talent just isn't there. It's interesting because when you look at our, detailed Sumer scores, looking at college tracking data, he was a standout basically anytime he had the rock. RJ Harvey was while he was at UCF. Now, obviously that was in the context of the Big 12 in a run happy offense. Everything was kind of set up for him and he was kind of the star of that offense as well. But maybe it's just not going to translate. He was another guy who I considered to kind of be on this list, despite, getting a quality number of carries during the first preseason game.
I'm going to follow that up with a few other running back names, honestly. And these are definitely not names of people that you were okay, these are 100% for sure. I mean, they're lower round draft picks, but right after the draft, running back is always one that you're okay, there might be an opportunity there. There might be an opportunity there. And so I'm putting some names on my kind of radar. And then there are a few names that I think have fallen off the radar based on preseason usage a little bit. Woody Marks, for instance, where he's coming up on the depth chart makes me concerned, right? Originally I thought, okay, Joe Mixon coming off of injury, Chubb coming off injury. Maybe Woody Marks is one that if the injuries don't actually get to a point where they're good, there's an opportunity there. Potentially there's a path to the field. And so maybe he'll be somebody that can take advantage of that opportunity. I'm just not necessarily seeing it on the depth chart at this point anymore. And again, this is a much lower down, from a fantasy ADP, we're in different neighborhoods here with our conversation. Caleb Johnson, I'm wondering about him coming into the game behind Kenneth Gainwell the other day. Are we because I think a lot of people are very much expecting a big role for Caleb Johnson, and it's starting to look like it's Jaylen Warren who is the starter. And are we concerned about Kenneth Gainwell being the other guy, or was Kenneth Gainwell playing the Jaylen Warren in the preseason game and Caleb? What do we make of that situation?
And I think also Caleb didn't look great, and I think that's the other thing is around the football field, that's what didn't look that good. That's always the problem, right? That ultimately is the problem when you get sort of the reviews he's gotten out of Steelers camp. And when you see the names in front of him, you're well, maybe he's just a rookie, but then when it doesn't actually look like it's translating well on the football field, that's when you really start to worry. It's kind of how I felt about Trey Benson last year. He came in, you're excited about the opportunity he has, and then you see him on the field and it's just that guy didn't look ready. He just didn't look ready to contribute. And so that's unfortunately how I felt a little bit about Caleb's debut there.
Yeah. Well, Trey Benson, Arizona Cardinals 1B running back right now, notably, according to James Conner.
I'll believe that when I see it, right? I think that would be
100%.
nice, right?
Me too. Me absolutely too. James Conner is weirdly a guy who, even though he's been around forever, I think just gets undervalued year after year after year. He's consistent and he's quiet, and everyone just sort of like still puts him on a tier of running backs that I think is beneath where he deserves to be. Sam, are you starting to rethink Caleb Johnson maybe stepping into the Najee role in that combination with Jalen Warren, or you think that it's still early?
I think Mike hit it of like, you're just not hearing good things. And in a situation where it seemed he was the direction, he fit into the role perfectly. He looked like someone who had the draft profile, the physical profile of who they wanted to be their tailback. And it seemed as if they were going to go a direction where Aaron Rodgers was going to be the veteran head of Arthur Smith's offense and not vice versa. And sometimes things just don't work out. We'll see how, the rest of the season goes. Maybe he is able to get it together. But I'm really reconsidering what my initial thoughts and predictions were about the Steelers, given the way they approached the draft, number one, and then given what my expectations were of how Arthur Smith was going to want to run his offense.
Has anyone heard anything about Trey Harris out of Chargers camp? Like, it feels like all the buzz that normally exists, that is blown out of proportion always, for sure, has been about Keandre Lambert-Smith in terms of like the flashy plays and the person who's actually drawing eyeballs. And then, of course, they go out and they sign Keenan Allen. And so you're like, there's a depth chart situation here happening where I'm just not even sure what the path to getting on the field is. And that was a role that I was like, one of those pass catchers that they drafted. And I'm including Gadsden, the tight end, even in this mix of like, one of them, I think they drafted enough of them that one of them probably has a role this season. And I'm starting to wonder if that's even true.
Yeah, I didn't watch this past week, but I watched the Hall of Fame game, and Lambert Smith looked better in that game, right? And I think a little more of a fit in terms of what they need and just his deep threat ability. So if Trey Harris isn't quite ready, I don't know what he provides over Quentin Johnston. Maybe obviously better hands. I think any wide receiver in the NFL provides better hands. But like, it just
maybe they got better.
There's building that role. Like Quentin Johnston got open more on tape last year than what I saw from at least Trey Harris in that game.
Sam, you made a really interesting point about Keandre Lambert-Smith, though, to me when I asked you about him off camera last week. And I want you to share that with everybody because I thought it was really valid.
Well, I think Mike kind of highlighted it as well. But there's, in the data perspective, there's items in which you kind of want to note. And obviously, we all watched Shedeur Sanders, and he was drafted after Dylan Gabriel. But it does mean something when a team drafts someone as far behind Trey Harris. Obviously, they get into camp, things change. But then at the same time, I was really interested that Mike highlighted how much Quinn Johnson was getting open, because the AI said that as well. As the season went on, Quinn Johnson was commanding more targets. The problem was that those targets were getting dropped. And so if that can be pieced together, and all of a sudden, like you said, Lindsay, the depth chart problem kind of begins, where I would really love to see Ladd McConkey's target share greatly increase this year to match the efficiency that he had this year. Then you add in Quinn Johnson, who is getting open and probably will continue to get open and just has to get it together. Now you add in Keenan Allen, and then you have two rookie wide receivers, both of which were not necessarily the most premium picks of all time. At some point, you have to establish the base rate of what you can expect for Keandre Lambert-Smith. And I think I would be more willing to bet on his base rate of, a day 2, day 3 guy who ended up getting selected by a team who needed wide receivers than, really buying into the training camp hype.
But do you think that there's also something to the sample size that we have from him in college? Because like a guy like Puka, when you're looking for those outliers late, sometimes you can go, okay, he missed time for various reasons. And so the book is still out. And that's why he's falling, because there's still questions that we can't answer. And so it's not a sure thing. There are other people that have been around for a long time, have established who they are. Like, we have a lot of data on who he is as a wide receiver. And so does it feel less likely that he would all of a sudden become a different wide receiver, or a wide receiver that we should evaluate differently?
I don't think so. I mean, I think I think we know what he is. And I don't think it's ever going to be like a 1 or even a 2. But he is a role player that fits what the Chargers probably need a little bit more than Trey Harris right now, because he's a deep threat. I mean, he can get open down the football field. He can at least provide the threat of, the sort of magnetism that is a guy who runs mid 4.3s, right? And what that brings to the rest of the receiving core and how much you have to respect that. So I don't, he's not Puka. He's not a volume wide receiver, but he is a 1 or 2 plays a game. Oh, shoot. How do we let that guy get behind this sort of player?
This is perspective that I need, by the way, as somebody who's done multiple 20-round fantasy drafts, the last 4 rounds of which are completely and totally dart throws at rookies. And I think I'm very rookie brained right now.
It's interesting with Lambert Smith too, because I think this is going to be something we're going to see more as NIL at the college level increases, where there's a player who was a role player in that he was, receiving targets, he was getting snaps. Was he necessarily the top offensive weapon? No, at a really high level at Penn State. And then he goes to Auburn, another really high level team playing SEC ball. He's a little bit more featured, but it was pretty much the same results. So I think Mike's expectation is kind of right on the money of he does what the Chargers need, and maybe he can, be a spike guy in fantasy, Lindsay, for some weeks, but I'm not going to bet on that. And I don't, it's going to be really, really hard to predict in any given week.
Should we stick with the wide receiver position for a little bit, Sam?
Yeah, I was a big proponent of Luther Burden going into the draft. And I had been tracked him for basically 2 years. I thought Missouri was one of the better teams in the SEC, if not in the country, for those 2 years. And I thought he was a major reason why. Obviously, there were troubles kind of throughout last season, despite the win-loss record in which Brady Cook and him simply could not get on the same page. I tended to blame Brady Cook a little bit more for that than Burden. And then obviously throughout the draft process, character concerns start arising, particularly about that relationship, particularly about this year. And when he went to the Bears, I thought it was a perfect situation because he doesn't necessarily have to be the top target earner, but Ben Johnson is going to put him in the correct moments that he needs to be in to succeed. And also I saw him very neatly mapping into an Amon-Ra St. Brown-like role. I went to the Bears game in person. I was in Soldier Field watching this game. This is certainly more of a feel thing because there were targets that he had. He did make catches. There were some plays where he was open in the end zone and just simply wasn't targeted for one reason or the other. So the usage was there, but they were with like the 2s and the 3s. And we talked to the general managers, we talked to the scouts earlier on in this series and just more generally. And they were like, look at who the guys are playing with. And that's kind of how the team thinks of them. And if Luther Burden is going to be running with guys like Devin Duvernay with the backup offensive line.
Entering the game after Devin Duvernay.
Exactly. And
Tyler Scott.
Exactly. And playing deep into there were moments where I legitimately, ate a hot dog, looked up, and I'm like, why is Luther Burden still in this game, man? And you start looking at that depth chart, and there's just a lot of names. I wouldn't say they're proven top-tier weapons at this point, but even someone like Olamide Zaccheaus has played extremely important football at a position that Ben Johnson probably wants him to play football at. So I'm starting to get a little concerned about my prior about Luther Burden being one of the best wide receivers in this draft. If that's going to be the place that he is going to continue to play in the preseason. Now, maybe it's shaking raw rust. He missed a lot of practice, stuff like that. But it definitely was a feeling of mine in stadium where I was thinking to myself, he should not be in this game at this point.
He was always kind of, I don't want to say square peg round hole. That's not quite he was always going to butt heads with Ben Johnson a little bit, just from what I saw at Missouri to what Ben Johnson likes in terms of the attention to detail. Like Burden was not a guy who was precise, unbelievably talented, not a precise route runner, not always exactly where he's supposed to be, can get lackadaisical. That doesn't fly into Ben Johnson offense. So like he is the antithesis of that. That's why, Jameson Williams couldn't make an impact in that team until year 3, right? And he was drafted a lot higher than where Luther Burden went. So that's maybe the career path that Luther Burden could mirror with the Chicago Bears, is that he's going to have to learn how to do the little things well before he gets the big role that would put him in, fantasy relevance, that would put him just relevance in terms of what the Bears can do. Now, maybe he gets, some handoffs, some screens, things of that nature, still can make an impact. But yeah, I do think that this is a multi-year process to get Luther Burden to the amount of crispness that Ben Johnson is going to require to fill the Amon-Ra St. Brown role.
What about some guys that are moving in the other direction positively? People who are outplaying our expectations for them at this point in time? I'm going to start by pointing my finger to the Pacific Northwest, which I've been doing a lot so far in training camp. Like Elijah Arroyo, I talked about a couple of weeks ago, and now I'm going to go in a different direction there and talk about Torrey Horton, who I think has been a guy that they continue to talk about out of camp up there. And this is an offense. Part of the reason that I'm even going to him is in addition to looking good and all of the buzzwords that you're looking for, were like defenders are talking about how he's, tough to go up against in the various ways in which he is. I'm looking for teams where there is opportunity available. And the Seahawks are one that just popped to me as targets that are available in that offense, right? Like with DK Metcalf gone and with Tyler Lockett gone, and obviously JSN has his role locked down. But other than that, like what does it all look like? And who are the pieces that are featured in this offense? And so I think more and more that you see him running with the ones and you hear buzz that he is actually still looking good in that environment, I kind of feel like there starts to be some signal. And Torrey Horton is a guy who's moving up my mental bird.
So I haven't watched him in the preseason yet. But I'll just say this. One thing I've been saying a lot about Seahawks in this receiving core and how it's been built is they're slow. Cooper Kupp was a 4.6 guy coming out. He's probably even slower than that right now. JSN was a 4.6 guy coming out.
I literally didn't even mention him. I forgot about Cooper Kupp. I mean, I didn't forget about him. Yeah, that's where I am with Cooper Kupp right now. So,
but I mean, it's in an offense too, where if just Clint Kubiak coming over from New Orleans, just look what they did last year, and it's like those receivers weren't running routes within the first 5-10 yards of the football field. It was a downfield passing offense, one of the most downfield passing offenses in the NFL. So you have 2 4.6 guys in this offense that requires you to, or at least has in the past, requires deep speed, requires downfield separation ability. And it's just like, that doesn't quite fit. But Torrey Horton's got speed. Torrey Horton has that ability to him. If you watched him at Colorado State, he could get open down the football field. So it could be more, I'm not saying Torrey Horton's, next Puka Nacua, but there is opportunity there because the only guy
you're not saying he's not.
The only guy stopping him is MVS here. Like in terms of who else is fast on that roster. And MVS at this point in his career is just like, he's kind of the guy that just gets passed around. It's like, oh, we need some speed. Let's go sign MVS. I don't think that's stopping. If you really got the goods, that's stopping you from getting targets in that offense for Torrey Horton.
And I think in the face of our Keandre Lambert-Smith dialogue, this is the opposite of that. Like, this is the one, this is a guy because of the stuff you outlined, Mike, and then also because kind of the reason he ended up as a 5th round pick was because of some pretty rough injury history. And if the dice is rolled correct, he ends up in a spot, like you said, where they need speed. He can provide that. He did that at Colorado State in a Jay Norvell air raid offense where he was kind of asked to do a lot, and that showed up on national television against Colorado several times as well. So this is the dice roll, Lindsay, that I'd rather take than someone like a Keandre Lambert-Smith, where he was extremely productive in a highlighted role and facing lesser talent, but he has the NFL capabilities and the production. And there's just kind of external reasons of why he fell in the draft. And I think this is a perfect spot for him. And I'm excited to see how this offense includes him.
I like that conversation about the ones that you want to roll the dice on, like the profile of that person. And I think that that's interesting. That's not necessarily a conversation that I think is had all that frequently about like where an evaluation is incomplete. And then maybe that's the guy that you bank on if you're going to gamble, that there's a chance that it's very different than what we've seen so far, as opposed to somebody who hasn't, who's played a lot, all of a sudden becoming a different player. Mike, what about you? Who's rising in your ranks?
I'm not sure they're rising. I picked 2 guys that I'm not sure they're rising in my ranks, but they're 2 guys because I was like really high on them in the pre-draft. But I think where they went and what I've heard from them in the preseason, I think both have a great opportunity to not only see the football field, but actually like start get a lot of touches. One's Kyle Williams for the New England Patriots, third round wide receiver. I mean, the preseason game, he was targeted 5 times and was like open on those targets. Didn't catch any of them, but that was not his fault. Those were some terrible passes that he got. But the separation ability, I mean, he had 14 touchdowns last year for like a 180-pound wide receiver. You only do that if you're really, really freaking open. And he was a lot at Washington State. And it already is here, in the preseason, getting reviews that he is out of training camp. So I think him in a wide open receiving room has a really good shot to just get a role at minimum, if not get a starting job. And the other one's Corey Krosky-Merritt for the Washington Commanders, their 7th round running back. He's just, I mean, you saw in the preseason, when he went out there, his footwork is so good between the tackles. His ability to like bounce between holes is outstanding. And they are I talk about the Seahawks being a slow receiver room. That's a slow backfield. Brian Robinson Jr., Austin Eckler at this point in time, Chris Rodriguez, there is not speed next to Jaden Daniels. Corey Krosky-Merritt has speed. He was a low 4.4 guy at his pro day. So there is that combination that, when you have the Jaden Daniels who runs a 4.4, usually it helps when you put another guy that runs a 4.4 next to him and makes that offense just a little bit more explosive. So I think both those guys are in really good spots to produce, and I think are more talented than where they were drafted back in April.
Sam, I think we are like in the running to break a record for a number of times Corey Krosky-Merritt mentioned on a podcast in the preseason. No, because we feel the same way. And I feel like everyone that we've talked to is kind of in the same boat. So that's a good signal.
If me and Lindsay were starting a hedge fund, I think it would be like Krosky-Merritt and Bros or something like that. Like the amount of investment we have in this young player. But again, talking about the profile of like, potentially something was missed. Literally, probably the poster child of this in this draft,
yes,
is Krosky-Merritt, where it's like literally a clerical error prevented him from playing. Goes to the Shrine Bowl where we all were and just kind of lit it up. That was immediately a standout. And I think it's interesting because we talked about with Luther Burden the amount of weapons to overcome, and to a certain degree, that's kind of the standpoint in that Cliff Kingsbury offense as well. I mean, you have Brian Robinson, who had a pretty good year last year, Eckler, who was fairly efficient and also good in the pass game. Then you also have Rodriguez and some other backs that really did get playing time, McNichols as well. And for him to already have basically jumped the line of at least kind of the role-playing backs is, I think, some pretty good signal. It'll be interesting to see how that carry share breaks down, particularly as some of the veterans start coming into the fold, particularly the wide receiver position. We're talking Terry McLaurin, obviously a massive screen game threat there, and then also Debo as well. I think we're probably going to see him get the backfield snaps that he saw while he was in San Francisco as well. So obviously it could get cluttered up by the end of the preseason, but it's great to see him, getting some reps and kind of standing out in an offense that really does utilize a lot of interesting ways to spring those running backs.
Another running back I want to mention here is, and how do you say his last name? Bears rookie Kyle
Monangai.
What you said, very different things, by the way. The two of you.
Did we? I think it was the same thing. Monangai.
Oh, okay. Did you say that, Sam? My bad. They just claimed it different in my ear. Okay, Monangai. He feels very interesting to me, and that might be because I'm kind of low on DeAndre Swift. But sort of where he was. I mean, I guess you could spin this both ways. You could say they rested Roschon Johnson. And if, Kyle was really impressive, maybe he's the Roschon Johnson. Like I'm kind of hoping that he's ahead of Roschon Johnson. But I'm also thinking that the DeAndre Swift pairing with Ben Johnson, who when he was in Detroit, the combination doesn't necessarily, I'm not loving it. I'm not even sure if I can articulate well why I'm not loving it.
I can articulate. I mean,
you
got rid of him already. You already moved on from them. They already said they traded him right to Philly. They said they kicked him out the door. So I could see why there's not a lot to love. And there's like the clip from Hard Knocks that year where it was Deuce Staley just like reaming into him, being like, hit the hole. Hit the hole. That's DeAndre Swift.
He kept cutting outside. Yes, that's the thing I remember most about that Hard Knocks.
So, and Monangai, for all, the reason he fell the 7th round, it's not because he doesn't run hard. The guy runs super hard. So like in that offense, he's not going to make those mistakes. He is not going to look to bounce out the same way DeAndre Swift is. So it's actually funny that you brought the Bears up, because I ranked all the running back rooms in the NFL this offseason. I had the Cowboys as the worst. I had the Commanders and the Bears as the two worst after that. So like we said, the Commanders is a great spot for Ja'Cory Cross-Kamara. I think the Bears is a great spot for anyone to break through, because I just don't think this is a talented running back room right now.
Okay. Yeah. Good. I mean, not good, but also good that I feel like we shared that opinion and I wasn't just like completely off. He averaged 5 yards a carry. I know it's the preseason, but he did well with the opportunity that he had in that first game, the chance that we had to look at him. He had a 60% route participation, which is something you're also looking for, I think, out of running backs these days. Like, you want to know that they are going to be involved somehow in the passing game, that you can keep them on the field a lot. So yeah, I liked what I saw out of him also. Can we maybe get somebody, and I know, peek behind the curtain to a degree, it's beneficial to talk about these guys that will be fantasy players, the skill position players, because I think that's what a lot of people are trying to figure out right now as they get ready for their fantasy drafts. But not everybody has to, that we talk about here has to be a fantasy producer. Is there anyone else, Sam, that you've got your eye on?
Yeah, I just loved what I saw from Willie Lampkin. And it turns out that, people who can block really well across multiple different divisions, basically in any spot, did it at the Senior Bowl, did it at North Carolina, did it at Coastal, can block really well. And despite the size, despite, not necessarily having the level of sheer talent of some of these other guys in this draft, he just blocks well. It shows up in the AI. It shows up when you watch film. And that's what he's doing for a team that loves people who block well and just extended their running back. I thought he was causing massive problems for the defense, for the Rams. I think that, maybe he can squeak out a starting position, but it's definitely great depth for a team that badly needs depth across the offensive line. I think he could potentially flex out the guard, maybe play a little bit there. I know that a lot of people thought he could even play, a Patrick Ricard type role as well. I just think there's so many options, and Les Snead must be stopped, because this is another transfer up guy who they take a shot on, who doesn't necessarily has some glaring problem. And then all of a sudden, week one, everyone is excited about him. So I just think it's interesting, the profile that he had of being immensely productive as an offensive lineman, minus the size, plus fitting into a Sean McVay offense, I think is a really, really good kind of brew to have a great arrow up on someone.
I don't think anyone's happier about Willie Lampkin's performance than maybe outside of his family than me, because I had him 63rd on my draft board. I watched probably more tape of his than any other offensive lineman last year, just because I was like, I'm looking for a reason this won't work. Obviously the height, the size are issues, but like he's broadly built. He's not most 6'6" offensive linemen also have the arm length of a 6'6" human being, so like 30-inch arms, which is like untenable at the NFL level. But he didn't. He had almost 33-inch arms. He has like this really wide build for a guy who's just short. And so I watched like every single meaningful game of his over the past couple seasons, and I was just like, I never saw a reason. He went up against an FSU duo defensive tackle who were like 330 and 340, and those guys are physical monsters, and he killed them. I mean, he dominated those guys in that game. And after that, I'm just like, I think it can work. I think this guy can get it done in week one of the preseason. Like, he was one of the best offensive linemen in the NFL. Obviously, it was not the best competition, but sometimes you don't always face the best competition. So I'm excited to see just what he gets in terms of opportunity, because that was high-level offensive lineman play. Obviously, there's issues physically that maybe when he goes against Dexter Lawrence or starting nose tackles, it looks different, but that was very, very impressive stuff.
I mean, when you are in his position, and Brandon Thorne, whose opinion I value very, very much when it comes to offensive line play, is like tweeting multiple clips of video of you from week one of the preseason in a positive manner and talking about you as a steal, I think that maybe there's something to that. I love that you gave us a non skill player name there, Sam.
Well, I think it's hard to identify sometimes, because you think about the talent distribution, or at least in my experience, like having played college football, like a lot of the wide receivers and running backs like are extremely talented, and there is that next tier. But when you go to the twos on the offensive line, it is a radically different story. And it's the same way on the defensive line. So it's kind of hard to identify in the preseason who can make a real difference because the talent drop off is so radically different when it comes in particular to run blocking and run stuffing across the offensive defensive lines.
Yeah, Austin Booker played really well, Bears' second year defensive end, but I'm watching the offensive lineman he's going up against, and I'm like, I'm blaming that offensive lineman for the this is not a guy who belongs in the league that he's going up against. So you kind of take that stuff then with a grain of salt. But I do still think offensive line versus defensive linemen, even the worst defensive linemen were still some of the best guys you would have faced in college. If you're still dominating, it's like that can hold some weight. That holds probably more weight O-line playing well than D-line, in my opinion.
One last question I want to ask you real quick before you go, Mike, is about Emeka Egbuka. Because I don't know which of these categories to put him in, to be honest with you. Like, he's a guy I loved in the draft, loved the talent. Landing spot, wasn't sure how much we were going to see him right out of the gate. And now, I mean, we're talking about people that are getting buzz. Like, he might have more buzz than any of the people that we've mentioned here. People are glowing about him. Like, the endorsements are massive. But I am convinced that once Chris Godwin comes back, there is a big role for Chris Godwin. So I'm not sure how Emeka Egbuka fits in. I'm not sure what to make of all of this. What are your thoughts on him?
I think Chris Godwin's contract requires him to play, requires him to get more snaps, more touches, more targets than Emeka Egbuka. And it was always kind of a weird draft pick because, like, you had two starting wide receivers. Maybe you go for shoot for the moon and get your future number one. Whereas Emeka Egbuka never felt like a future number one. He felt like a NFL ready number two. And so that guy can play tomorrow for the Bucs. That was the eval on him coming out of Ohio State, was that NFL ready. Don't even have to worry about it. Plug and play. He's going to work out. So I do just worry. I'm just like, how many mouths can you feed in this offense? There's two receivers probably in front of him, just based off of who they are, Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. There's a tight end in Cade Otton who was commanding targets at times down the stretch. There's a running back in Bucky Irving who you obviously want to feed. I think the fact that the two guys in front of him are Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, with their injury histories in recent years, at some point, Egbuka is going to look like a number one, number two in that offense. I don't think it's day one, but probably week 8, week 9, somewhere in between there, Emeka Egbuka is going to be a 8 to 10 target a game wide receiver. And then I'm not sure from there he ever looks back.
Okay. You said originally that in the draft, you didn't think that he was a number one wide receiver.
Yeah. So from a prototypical traits perspective, he's not Mike Evans, right?
Is he Amon-Ra? Is that possible? That he's that type of
I think
number one wide receiver?
It could be that. That's obviously, there are offenses that feature that. That's not every offense. I don't know what Josh Grizzard's offense is going to look like. That's not what the Bucs offense though has operated like in the past 2 years with Canales, with Cohen though.
All right. Mike Renner, good stuff. As always, tell us where we can find your work.
You can find it at Pushing the Piles, the podcast I'm on, me and Kyle Long, 4 days a week. And you can find me on Twitter at Mike Renner _. Tweet out most of my articles. It's mainly draft stuff. I don't do a lot of NFL articles, but that's mainly what you're going to see from me.
I feel like that's our audience. People that are constantly looking for different roster building notes that they can file away for the future. Mike Renner from CBS Sports, thank you so much for your time.
For sure. Thanks for having me.